In science, few aspects are as important as scientific writing. Scientific writing is really our way to communicate. It's a way to demonstrate our credibility, and it's a process that takes a lot of effort. It's like a muscle. You can only become good at it through serious training. There are really no shortcuts, and it's our way to really promote the research we're doing and learn about what other people have done. It's really something I think that everybody, if they're pursuing a degree that is related, a career that's related to science, I think something that needs to be taken seriously. And even if you're not thinking of becoming a scientist, all of us will be communicating in one way or the other. And writing is very, being good at writing is very, very powerful. So in this video, I'm basically going off from a document that I've put on my website, and you have the link there in front of you. And I'm going to give you some specifics on how to get started, some of the thoughts that I have gone through when I've been doing my writing over the years, and some of the seen what students and others, and as a reviewer, what people have tried to get published and what they have submitted as essays in coursework. So I hope I provide plenty of details that should be of relevance to you, and hopefully you will walk away from this video with better tool sets, with better tools, better ideas on how to approach scientific writing and become a better writer. In addition to the video that I am producing here, I want to share with you this link. My good friend and colleague Jim Carey has produced this wonderful lectures as well, which will give you a lot of additional information and inspiration to improve your scientific writing. So definitely take advantage of that as well. With this lecture, I really hope to inspire you to move forward with your scientific writing and really take it seriously. If you're early, even if you're a first-year student, you need to get started right away. So I'm giving you specific suggestions to how to get started, how to overcome sort of that paralyzing feeling of looking at a white piece of paper or a large blank computer screen. I'm also giving you some suggestions to how you can use existing literature in the process to use what others have done and not sort of reinvent the wheel, but use what other people have done. How I'm going to show you or give you some ideas to how you can specifically develop a structure or an outline for a research paper, whether that's an essay or a full article. I'm going to give you some hints to language and other editorial aspects of how to write more succinctly and use references for that as an example. And then if you are, I'm also at the end gonna share with you some aspects on, if you're an ABI 50B, how you have to write your own review essay, and how you're gonna perform a peer review, meaning you will be handed an article by another student and you are then gonna review that. So all of this is covered in this video. To underscore my comment that you can start you should start your scientific writing as early as possible, I'm going to bring up an example, a student I had when I worked at the University of Western Australia in Perth. Katrina, she was a student in my class, and we did some lab sessions in that class, and her writing was, in my view, very, very good. So after class, I talked with her about it, and we decided to work together on turning her lab report into a small mini review. So this is quite, she is indeed a unique student, but I think too few people are taking advantage of this opportunity, that even lab reports could potentially be published in some way or another. Or you could start the process and then combine it with an internship or something. But she's now she became that, after we did this, she became a first author on a peer-reviewed article. And I understand it's not the best plant science today is probably not the most well-known journal in the world, but it is a peer-reviewed article. And it does mean that she could use that in her applications for scholarships, for graduate school, for many other, for awards and other things, because she was now she had a track record. She had the experience, and she could actually show that she had this as a bullet point on her resume. So this is something that can be done even by undergraduate students, and several undergraduate students in my program, they have been involved in publications. Not many of them have been first authors, but they have been authors, and I think that's a very important thing, and something you should seriously consider. So if you go into something like Google Scholar or some other search engine and look up Katrina, you can actually see that her article there, okay, so it's only been cited 6 times. That's probably not a whole lot, but at least it's a start. You've got to start somewhere. So this is clearly something that was important, and actually it was one of the reasons why she was able to get into vet school later in her career, and it gave her a lot of credentials when she had to speak with potential graduate advisors, that she already had this experience. So there's a lot of work that goes into that, but it's also a way you can really invest in your future, is becoming a good scientist and using it, not wait with acquiring these skill sets when you are finishing up your grad school, or sort of, no, you can start this right away. And especially in times with COVID, where you may have a lot of downtime, a lot of things you can't do, you're stuck in a dorm room anyway, why not write a mini review? Why not try to write something that could potentially be publishable? And why not use that as a hook or a bait or whatever you want to call it, when you, for instance, approach a professor in some lab and say, hey, I've looked up this research. I would really like to write a mini review about this project, this topic. Would you be interested in doing that with me? That would be a wonderful way of sort of showing who you are and how committed you are to science. And so really something I would encourage you to consider seriously. The writing process starts sort of at a very abstract level, where you begin by asking yourself some very sort of basic, almost existential questions about, why are you writing this story in the first place? Why is this important? Who should be included, and what would potentially be relevant to construct a narrative, piece these pieces of information together in a logic way? Who should I target? Who is my target audience? Within the sort of the discipline of biology, is it people who work mainly in the field? Is it people who work mainly in the lab? Is it people with a statistical inclination? Is it people with an evolutionary inclination? Because this will give you an idea of which journal to look into, and therefore also which articles you should look at as potential templates for what you're writing, and therefore also which author guidelines you should be following. And then you use that to sort of develop a structure. So I'm now sort of, after I've spent a couple of minutes sort of telling you about Katrina and what she wrote, I'm hoping that I've convinced you that writing is important. So I'm now assuming that you are in the process. And so you start with some very fundamental thinking here, and then let's sort of look more into what comes next more specifically. The body of existing published literature is really something you should look at as a phenomenal source of inspiration for you. And I'm going to list at least 4 ways that you can use it, and sort of read it through different kinds of glasses, or look at it through different prisms, whatever you want to call it. But the idea is you have this article in front of you and you're going to read it, but there's so many different ways you can focus on different aspects of it and have different benefits from reading it. So of course the normal way of reading a paper is probably you want to learn about, you're interested in zebras or something, and you want to know what they have done specifically in this study about zebras, or they worked in a particular area that you are also interested in, so that's why you pick this paper. So something related to the topic, to the species or the area or the way they analyze things, sort of they use some technology or something, so specific about the topic itself. But you could also approach it simply from a method standpoint, how they analyze the data. Maybe you don't care about the organisms. Maybe it's something completely different. Maybe you are interested in certain methods. So if you end up in a lab or have an opportunity to do something with a special way of tagging animals or recording them or taking blood samples or some other sort of specifics, you could look at how that technology was used in other animals. So now you really don't care about the introduction. You don't care about how they use the results. You're specifically looking at the mechanics. How did they do certain things? So you can look at that. But you could also forget about everything in the introduction and in the materials and methods, and just look at their presentation of their results. How did they make graphs? How did they use colors? How did they use symbols? How did they actually visualize in a clever way something complex? If you have some very complex data that you need to have analyzed, you can maybe search on that particular method and then see how people presented their data. So you have an idea of, should this be line graphs or bar graphs or something with dots or some three-dimensional stuff, or how would you do this? And the fourth way of reading it could be specifically looking at the language and the writing style itself. Because many of us, including myself, English is not my first language. So and especially in the beginning, we may not be familiar with the sort of the scientific language. So you can look very specifically at just the language. So you're reading the whole thing, but you don't care about the organism. You don't care about the results. You don't care about the methods. You're strictly looking at the language. So how long are the sentences? How do they start sentences? How do they end them? What are the words they're using? What are the words that they are not using? How are things tied together? How complicated are the sentences? You can look at many of sort of the mechanical aspects of the language itself. So really lots of different ways you can approach an article. And as you read more and more papers, which is a huge part of writing, and that's why I'm also encouraging you to write, is because it's just like if you want to learn how to play guitar or something, it's also very good to listen to guitar by others playing guitar. Same thing here. So by embarking on this scientific writing, you will also be reading more papers. And as you read more and you write more, you'll just see your own level just sort of gradually progressing and becoming more and more refined. And in the process, try to be as interactive as possible. Maybe share with some of your peers, and think about questions that you might have. Think about how you can extract things actively from this article and use it, not plagiarize, but use it by adopting your own sort of style into something that was done by others. So really think of the body of published literature as a wonderful source for you to learn more and improve your own scientific writing. It's probably a little cheesy to say that writing always takes longer than you think. But there's a lot of truth to that it's a very, very long process typically. And the biggest mistake you can do is to wait until the very last minute, the very last couple of weeks, because typically it takes several months to get through it, especially if you're early in the process and there's a couple of advisors involved and some other collaborators. People take time to do their revisions, and there's going to be many versions. So time management is at the essence here. You really have to think of starting as early as you possibly can, and start writing materials and methods and other aspects as quickly as you can, so that you get them out of the way. And another thing that I want to mention here is trying to, and this is also where, yeah, I'm going to give you some specifics on how you can turn this daunting marathon, this sort of task you have in front of you, writing an entire essay or an entire article, breaking it into smaller chunks, makes it much more feasible, and it also makes it easier for you to set up, to manage your time and say, okay, I'm going to write sort of paragraphs at a time. So which are the paragraphs? So by next Tuesday, I need to have written this paragraph, and then 3 days later, I have this other paragraph. And then just by stringing it together little by little, you will ultimately reach the finish line. So really, we're going to talk about more specifics about this, how you can break it down and make this task more feasible. And also, and as another comment I want to make is that review articles. So these are articles where a lot of literature has been summarized and been digested. This is a wonderful idea, wonderful place to start, to also get ideas, figure out what has already been done. How could I complement this? How could I add to the existing body of knowledge? You don't want to go down and write something that has already been done 11 times, especially if it's the same organisms. Maybe they have done it on one organism and you can do it on another, or sort of and make some adjustments to what's already there. But that can really help you out looking at what has been published. So again, another way of using the existing body of literature is going through the reviews and find out what has already been published. What I'm going to present to you now represents my suggestion. That doesn't mean that it is right or better or something. It's just one suggestion. I think just like learning an instrument or how to swim or ride a bicycle, we do that. We have different approaches to all these tasks. This is just one of them. So what I think is important to mention is that it's not that we typically start with the title and then we just write, and then the last thing we do is put in the references. It doesn't follow the chronological order of the paper itself or the article. So you can see here to the left the typical outline of a research article, right? And I think the place to spend a lot of time initially, and potentially where you're going to end up, where I typically spent the most time, is on the introduction, is how I introduce the reader to the problem that I'm finding, that I'm intending to write about. It is where, so it sounds cheesy maybe, but the introduction should be the introduction to the study, which means that I have to look at everything that we as authors have to look at, everything the reader would need to be introduced to in order for the study that we are presenting, the data that we are presenting, to make sense and be important. So and it's very, very hard to write. There's a lot of attempts here where you're sort of finding out what you want to do, and you can by focusing only on the introduction here. I think a good way to start is using Brainstorm, and you can do that either by yourself, storm your own brain, or you can storm in collectively. You can get together as many people as you think need to be in the room or on Zoom or whatever. And so how many species are involved? What are the larger problems? And start sort of using keywords, key phrases, and just get as much up on a board or on a computer screen or whatever the medium you're using to sort of find out what are the key elements, what are the key players in this story. Because you want, once you have identified the key players, you want those key players to be in the title, and you want to use those terms consistently throughout your article. You want them to be in your hypothesis. They need to be in your figures and all this stuff. So this is a way to really sort of start developing the vocabulary and the consistency of the terms that need to be used throughout the paper. you may use the concept of a funnel as a way to describe the introduction. That's at least what I do. Something where you start out wide and then you sort of narrow it in and then you distill it. And at the very bottom, you sort of get what is coming out is the story, is why whatever you are doing is so important, why you have identified this research hypothesis as being something that needs somebody's attention. And can also, and why this can sort of lead to an important to answers or more questions about something that you have identified as important. It's not necessarily a linear funnel, so that's why it's sort of floating a little bit, because you may have to go make a little bit of tangents along the way. You don't want those tangents to be too extreme, because then you're going to lose the reader, right? So and you only have so much space. It's not a sort of a novel where you can just go on and ultimately come back. No, you have to sort of keep things in line. There has to be a logic to it. And you can start broadly with sort of some paradigms or some bigger context about the sort of extinction rate of animals, or something related to genetics or evolution or behavior or some other aspect, and then sort of narrow down and talk about how these animals have been studied, what are the methods, what are some of the problems, possible alternatives. So you're sort of introducing people, if it's something about methods, if it's a methods paper where you're analyzing data in a particular way, well, then because you're introducing the reader to your study, you need to introduce those methods. If you're using specific technology that most people are not aware of, then you need to talk about how that technology, those methods have been used. If you're talking about a specific area and something in your conclusion is very important about, well, this peninsula in Alaska is just unique in so many ways, well, then we need to talk about geography, and we need to talk about peninsulas in general and something, so people have an understanding of what this is all about. So really think about how you can tie things together. What are the elements that need to be introduced, and also how you tie them together. And so what has been published that is relevant, and where are the gaps, so that you can then ultimately synthesize and say, because we know all this and we don't know this is how we're going to approach this problem and address this knowledge gap. And then we ultimately come up with a hypothesis where we sort of predict a cause-effect relationship, that we are going to study this, and that's why we set up these experiments. Or if we do this analysis, if we sample these organisms and we do these analysis, we would expect this and this. And then ultimately, why is that important? What are the bigger sort of picture here? We can then sort of just articulate that very shortly at the very end of the introduction. But that really sort of is the fundamental structure of most introductions. And I would actually encourage you to try even to reverse engineer this. So try to read a paper next time as another way of wearing a different pair of glasses, but only look at the introduction, and then give names to each of think of each paragraph and think of what this is all about. So what would the bullet point be that describes this paragraph and this and this and this? And I think if you do this a couple of times, you will come up with a structure that is very similar to this. So you will see that most papers follow a similar structure. And it would be smart of you to adopt that, so that you're doing what most other people are doing. That's going to make the review process so much easier. If it's one of the first times you have to write a research article, a very good way, I think, to start, and what I recommend my students to do, is find a couple of papers that you like. And this can be because of their structure, it can be how they are written, it can be because they're similar topic, and you can basically look at them as a template. So you have over here, you have the article that was published, and then you have yours here, and you can just say, okay, so they started out like this, so I need to start out like this. Then they did this, and then they did that. So you just sort of, it's also a way to overcome that intimidation of the blank paper or screen, right? You can just sort of, okay, I'm just going to follow what they are doing, and basically and that's not plagiarism. If you're just following the structure, that's a very good way of using, very active way of using existing literature. So really a good way to get some feel for how to put this all together, and then ultimately come up with your study, your story, and the relationship and the expected outcomes that you think that this paper may have. And this is something you can do, and you will probably revise it. You will probably do it multiple times, because you do it once you have some idea of what your data is going to look like. But then maybe when you analyze even further and you start reading more, you realize, oh, so you have to change things. But that's okay. It's a dynamic process that you sort of go back and forth between the different elements, and maybe you find out, oh, you suddenly find a paper that you didn't know of, and they showed something, and now you realize you have to analyze the data in a different way. And because of that, you're now showing something different. So now your introduction needs to be different. And because your introduction is different, you also need to change the title and your hypothesis. But that's an iterative process that is part of this. And this is why it takes so long, and why you have to be able to commit as much time, a lot of time to this, because otherwise you're not going to get to the finish line. I already mentioned how you can do a brainstorm with yourself, or with a group of co-authors that you're working with, or whoever really. A good way to do this, I think, is buying yourself some colored sticky notes. If you're a visual person like many of us are, it becomes really useful. So you can also have different pens, different colors. So the idea is, well, maybe everything, so keywords or terms that are related to methods, we're going to make them green. Organisms, we're going to make them blue. Something else is another color. So basically you have different colors that represent different parts or different elements, different players in the different categories of players, and you start grouping them, you just get them on the board there. And then afterwards you start putting them together, and instead of having 3 greens, you may be able to boil them down to just 1. And then you sort of put them together, and so it's a way of like pearls or Lego blocks. You're sort of putting them together in a particular, you're organizing them gradually more and more, so you also see which ones should go together, and the order of them, the logic sequence, and therefore thinking about how would I bridge from this to this. So definitely I would recommend that you get yourself some sticky notes and use that as part of the initial process of developing an outline of your paper. So with the materials and methods, it's important to remember why they're there in the first place. And of course, the reason why they have to be in the paper is for somebody else to be able to essentially repeat what you did. So you want to provide enough detail so people can do this, and that means, for instance, include if you're using specific equipment, the manufacturer, the distributor, where you get it, how and some numbers on how many replicates and all this, and how you set up your experiments. But there's a balance here, because of course you don't want to say, well, so we walked 12 steps, and then we, with our right hand, we took the electrical cord and we put it into a 110 volt circuit, right? We know that we don't need to go to that level of detail. So it's a balance, and therefore read other papers, see how other people are doing it, to make sure that you are not providing overly detailed description of your studies. Also make sure that when you have your hypothesis and there's maybe some objectives underneath that hypothesis, or because of this hypothesis you have 4 or 5 specific objectives, well, the methods should be aligned with those objectives. So what is objective? So the methods for objective 1 should come first, and then for objective 2, and so forth. So again, for the structure to be consistent, and then if you have keywords in your hypothesis and you have these objectives, this order of those keywords in the title should also align. So in every possible way, you're trying to make things as concise and consistent as they possibly can. And then look at language. It's a good way to, like I say here, similar to Johnson et al., you did this and this and this. So this is a way to sort of protect yourself. You are now saying we're using methods that Johnson et al. Also did, so we can get away with it. You're going to have less pushback on methods if you are using methods that other people got away with when publishing. So bear that in mind, that it's maybe a good idea to look at what other people have done and then follow what they did. Unless you want to do it your own way, that's good too. Or you can say, we tried Johnson et al., but it didn't work, so we modified it slightly, and therefore we did this and this. But in other ways, just respect what has been done, what has already been published, and use it to your advantage in as many ways as possible. In the results section, the balancing act is to sort of discuss or present, digest, help the reader see what's important in the tables, in the figures, without truly discussing them. So you don't want to state, for instance, that the x-axis in figure 1, x-axis is time and the y-axis is shoe size, right? We don't want to go there. People can see that, but you sort of want to get into helping them see what's important without necessarily getting into why it's important. So you help them analyze it so that it should be as obvious as possible, because you've spent time on making the graphs as pedagogically have as high quality as possible. But on the other hand, in the results, you are providing them some suggestions to what to focus on. So that's really very important. And you do that by sort of highlighting what you think are the main trends in your tables or figures. You typically don't include references in your results, so you're not comparing it with other results. You're going to do that in the discussion. That's where you discuss your results, right? And a good start also as part of preparing you before you even go there is the last point here, is make drawings of your figures. So as you have developed the outline and figured out what you want to say and why you want to say it, you can also sort of draw. So I think this should be figure 1, and this should be figure 2, and this should be figure 3, and then sort of develop that. And then, of course, as you analyze the data more thoroughly, you may end up having to change that. But it's a working process, right? But something that could be very, very useful, especially if you have other people involved in the writing process, so you can agree on what you think should be the different figures. Very important. We are basically told that figures should be self-explanatory. This is a figure that I published in one of my very first articles, and to say the least, this requires some explanation, right? So there's a whole bunch of forest trees and some arrows that and then there's a arrow sort of going around, and there's some CCA 1 and 2 and all this stuff. So there's a lot going on here. So this is where is a perfect example, I think, of a figure that really needs some coaching. You need to help the reader have some idea of what on earth is going on, and why are the 1s down here, the 2s here, the 3s and 4s and 5s over here, because that actually relates to that big circle there. And it has to do with forest succession, development of mature forest in Benin and West Africa. But yeah, something like this is as a complicated figure. You really want to help the reader, guide the reader, understand and extract what is important. So that's what you do in the results. In the discussion, we then flip the funnel on its head. And if you've done a great job in the results to highlight what the main results were in tables, figures, and all these other visuals, you are then going to have a much easier job putting that all together and convincing the reader that this is all very important, and showing some trends that are of interest not only to people working with the organisms that you worked with, but also much broader, or the methods you use can be applied more broadly. So you have sort of two very important and equally important and complementary responsibilities in the discussion. You are summarizing why, actually maybe more like three things. So you're summarizing what was found, and you are showing other people why it's important. You are corroborating this with data and citations, so you compare it with what other people have done, and then you also sort of extrapolate and say, well, this is not just something relevant to peninsulas in Alaska, or to Poudre Creek in Davis and elsewhere. No, there's actually a lot of sort of water bodies that are in the same conditions, or where this applies. So you sort of extrapolate and make it relevant to a broader audience, so that many people are going to be interested in what you're doing. But typically you sort of end up very broadly with your discussion. So it's the opposite funnel of what you had in the discussion. You can also, and this is very important, you should bring up shortfalls. If you feel that some of the data you had were not sort of the best, something went kind of wrong, or you wish you had $10 million more and 50 people more to collect your data, you can find ways to say that in a diplomatic way. I think that adds credibility to a study when people sort of acknowledge that, well, we wish so. So you sort of talk about the limitations of your project, not just about how important it is, but also where the limits are and where there may be some shortfalls. This slide gives you some specifics on the sort of editorial aspects of writing. I would strongly encourage you to refrain from long and complex sentences. I think especially in the beginning, keep it short and sweet, much easier to read. Keep it very clear and concise, and avoid these subjective words. Make it as quantitative as you can. It is not what you feel. It's not about you. It's essentially what the p-value shows, whether there's a statistical difference or not. So definitely look at the language in published articles. See how they got away with it, how they expressed what you're trying to say. And in specific fields, there will be jargon or terms that are being used. Try to adopt them, because reviewers will be looking for that. They're going to be pulled in and be reviewing your paper. So you want to use the language that is typically being used. And in your use of terms, if you're talking about something like intraspecific variation or some specific term, use it consistently throughout. Don't use 12 different ways of saying the same thing. That is really confusing to read. So be very concise. And that's why early on with those sticky notes, find out what terms you think you should be using and then stick to them. Okay? Create smooth and logic transitions between paragraphs. Once you have it ordered so that you feel that there's a logic flow to it, what are you then going to write to as a bridge between this paragraph and that paragraph? And get whatever the right means, but at least consider the importance of trying to be broad, because you are wanting your paper to be of relevance to people that not necessarily work on the exact combination of location, species, and methods that you are. So how is this? So even though you're working with penguins, could this potentially be relevant to people who work with Arctic foxes or turtles? Or so are there ways you could broaden that out? That is a way to sort of draw people in and make some of the claims you're making of more relevant to a broader audience. And this comment I'm making here about many drafts necessary, and then write, run, read, rewrite, is what I sort of obey by. So you write something, and this has happened to me so many times. I write something and I'm like, yeah, this looks great. I'm happy with it. I'm ready to submit it, but I'm like, oh no, let me just go for a jog or play some tennis or go for a swim, have a cup of coffee, one more, something. But exercise, I think, is typically very important because it makes you sort of, it resets your physiology a little bit. Your entire system now gives focus to the muscles, not to the brain. So try to do some exercise and then go back and read it. So what has happened to me so many times, I've written something, I thought it was perfect, and then I look at it and I'm like, what the? And there may even be sentences in there that I don't even understand. So it's amazing how you can sort of fool yourself to think this is the greatest thing ever, and all you need to do is just walk away for a little bit, burn some calories, come back, look at it again, and then realize, gee, I need to spend some more time on this. So do that a couple of times before you submit it, before you send it to your supervisor, before you send it to your colleagues. And this is also why it's going to take time to write, is precisely because of this process, that we think we're doing such a great job, and then we go back and we realize it's riddled with errors that need to be fixed. We just didn't see them the first time around. So many iterations are going to be necessary, but you can minimize that number by being very careful reviewer of yourself. And this is something also that requires training, is to learn how to sort of objectively look at your own writing and be critical. Try to, and you can read it, one way is to read it backwards, start from the back and read it the other way, and see if you pick up things that you otherwise wouldn't pick up. This is something you can practice, but definitely something you need to look into, ways to catch your own errors and find out how you can improve things so that you don't have to have 25 iterations of this, but maybe only 12. If you're unfortunate enough to have me as your instructor in one of your lectures, in one of your courses, you'll probably see, and you have to submit some essays. You will likely see that I'm referring to you should submit your essays as a professional document. So what do I mean by that? Well, that is kind of the same as you're going to a job interview. So typically it's a good thing to dress up a little bit to show that you respect the person in front of you, that you are serious about your application. It's a way of showing that you are committed, that you take this very seriously. The same thing with a document here. We want that you should show the reader immediately that this is something you take seriously. So have a front cover, find a nice picture, could even be a little bit funny or something, but good quality, not a sort of a poor quality photo taken from the bottom of a sleeping bag or something. It's something that looks professional. Have a index your different sections, use consistent font, maybe number the pages. Overall, just make the document look as if somebody like you cared about this. And we don't want any spelling errors. In today's world, everybody has access to some level of digital edit, sort of word processing. So take advantage of that. Use illustrations, so use them to your advantage and mention them in your text. Definitely use citations, and we'll talk about that here in a second. All the bridges, all the language I've talked about, very, very important. But overall, make it look like something you're proud of, something that represents you, something, maybe you can use some colors, whatever it takes that you think this looks like a serious document. Somebody cared about this. This is something I'm proud of. As part of becoming a scientific writer and somebody who does this a lot, this is an aspect I really want you to also embrace as quickly as possible, as early as possible in your career, and that is use of software management. All these programs, and this could be, for instance, EndNote, it could be Mendeley, it could be Zotero. Some of them are free. Not all of them are, but find one that works for you, and definitely look at YouTube videos on how to use this. This makes your life of writing so much easier, and it allows you to present your references in a consistent manner, make it look very professional. Okay, and it's a way to automatically insert references that you have picked. So when you state some sort of major claim in your article that this is that something important to your study, you can support your claim by referencing it. Well, when you insert them in the body text and the way they are listed at the end, that's what the software, the citation software does for you, and you can easily adapt it from one journal style to another if you're using these software packages. Doing it manually just opens up for error. You're going to make mistakes, and really not necessary in today's world. So definitely look into these software packages and see how which one works best for you. I know this is a lot of text here, but the reason why I'm sharing it with you is because these are typical comments that we have been giving to students' essays over the years. So this will give you an idea of what is typically being highlighted as either positive or negative comments. So look at these and then maybe apply them to your own essay or your own draft, and see whether you either could also be whether you think you did the same good job, or whether you think that this is something you need to improve on. So use this list as a checklist for what you need to do in order to improve your scientific writing.